So, cari fratelli e sorelle, and welcome to my weekly video blog. We're back to the Getting to Know Me series this week, but just to let you know that this week has been very long, and most of the reason for that is because it has been very, very hot as well. I wouldn't say we've had record temperatures, and I wouldn't say we've had them for very long, but we have had the odd day which has been just very, very hot indeed. And that's never a help. That's never a help with me. I tend to sort of melt in the heat a little bit. So it seemed like a very long week because of it. So this week, the Getting to Know Me is called the Primrose Path because we are on to yet another season, and this season was probably the shortest season, well it is, the shortest season that I've ever had, because this season was only 2 years long. And what it does is it covers my time in London, basically. So that's basically from August, September 2003 to August and September 2005. It's a very short period of time indeed. Now you might want to watch this video in conjunction with the Getting to Know Me, the Living and Learning series entitled The War You Wage, because my time in London was a steep learning curve, and not all of it was very positive. He was looking for some way of getting rid of me, and he decided that he'd sort of throw things at me like, you know, well, you've lied about the state of your health at the time of interview. And of course I didn't lie. I said that on the grounds of health that there was nothing that I was aware of that would be a cause for concern in terms of health, because as far as I knew I'd recovered and I'd been told by the professionals that there was nothing wrong. Further to that, as soon as I had the symptoms re-emerge in the autumn, I went to the cathedral straight away and was told that, you know, there was not going to be any issue about it. So, and then of course 6 months after that, when I finally was better and on treatment, etc., then they decided that they were going to launch a sort of persecution, and that's what it felt like. That is what it felt like, because of course you cannot disassociate where you're working in that sense with what it stands for, and the marked impact that that had on me was that I stopped taking communion, and I didn't take communion, nor did I go to a church after leaving St Paul's for 8 years. 8 years. That damaged me in terms of, you know, trusting, I suppose, in the established Anglican church. The best part of being down there was obviously being at St Paul's. It is a beautiful, beautiful building, and I used to go to evensong almost every day, choral evensong almost every day, even though it wasn't technically speaking a requirement. Whether I was working, if I was working, obviously I was there, but often I wasn't, and I would go along sort of anyway. I think one of the things that sticks out in my mind was one of the consecration of bishops ceremonies, and they've changed the whole ceremony structure now, but back then the service began with these two men just sort of dressed as normal clerics, and there came a point in time where they were taken backstage, if you like. They were taken off the front and into one of the aisles that were sort of secluded from public sight at that point. And they were dressed then by the team of vergers in the episcopal robes, because obviously they were being consecrated, they were being made bishops. And it was very interesting to see the difference between, because there was two of them, and it was very, very interesting to see the difference of how they sort of reacted. One of them was sort of given a nasty sort of wooden staff, and you know, he allowed himself to be dressed, etc., etc. And the other one was sort of given quite a large sort of big staff, and he was a bit sort of snatchy, you know, I can dress myself sort of thing. And I was just watching this. I was not actually doing any of this sort of the dressing or anything like that. but it felt like that was the moment of consecration, and you could actually see the sort of spiritual character of the person coming out. And I liked that idea, the symbology of taking these two people that are relatively normal away and then returning them sort of onto back out into the front, where they could be seen in their new sort of episcopal garb. And spiritually speaking, I think that was probably the best moment I had down there, and I was sort of just watching it. It is funny if you watch the end of Angels and Demons, the film. It's quite funny because they show you a sort of a similar sort of thing that's sort of very obviously it's staged, but the idea is that right at the end, you know, the new Pope is about to step out onto the balcony of St. Peter's for the first time and be seen by everybody, and he's in this room. Obviously the curtains are closed at this point, and he's being dressed in his garb for the first time, and it was sort of a moment a little bit like that. So, you know, I loved London. I discovered that I loved living in a big city, and the idea was always that I would stay in London, or that I would go and carry on sort of being a verger somewhere else. A couple of weeks before I was due to finish, I sort of tripped over a curb wearing sandals, and I broke my fingers, and that was it. I couldn't work anymore, and I wouldn't be able to work for several months, over the time at which the tenure ran out. So obviously I was forced out of London and back north to my parents, basically. It's one of those sort of freaky things, or maybe not freaky, but to me it felt a little bit like being barred. You know, I was sort of barred from that line of work because of the vindictive actions of my line manager, and then I was barred from the sort of big city as well by sort of fate or whatever. And I wrote a report about all of this called the Primrose Path, because of course you know the saying, the Primrose Path leads to the everlasting bonfire. In other words, you know, looks can be sort of deceiving, and what is sort of really nice and luxurious and sensual and whatever could be sort of a front to hell. That basically was also the period of time in which flight, which I've sort of spoken to you about a little bit before, was sort of revealed, I suppose. You know, I had been struggling with my sexuality up to that point for many years, and at first I'd sort of hidden it. I'd only told one person when I found out, and her answer was, well, sleep with a female prostitute to make sure if you are or not. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. You know, I had gone to university, and I had decided not to say anything and not to investigate, you know, that part of my life at all, hoping that it would just vanish. The second point of that was finally sort of telling people, I suppose. I told my family, and my mother's sort of reaction was, well, her first phrase was, we were afraid of something like this, or we were afraid this was going to happen, or something like that. And I went through all the sort of churchy ways of dealing with this, you know. Can we pray for healing? Can we go to Christian groups, sort of homosexual support groups, basically? Relate, True Freedom Trust, that sort of thing. And they only made things even more difficult, because they were a little bit psychological, a little bit Freudian, you know, a little bit, well, you're this way because, you know, of your father, or whatever. You know, you haven't got a strong man in your life, therefore you yearn for one, or it's, you know, your partner is what you really want to be yourself, but you can't distinguish that. There's all sorts of psychological sort of things that were sort of coming out, and that was just making things worse. So we'd sort of settled on going through university without sort of doing anything, but now telling people that, you know, that was the case if they case if they asked. And then the anxiety disorder hit, and one of the things that could have led to that, as well as the worry of what was going to happen after university, was the suppression of this. And so once I felt better, there was a portion of time down there when I was, you know, very active. One might even say promiscuous. You know, I'm not going to condone that sort of behaviour at all. But at that point in time, I thought, well, you know, I've paid the price for, you know, this sort of holding this all in, and I can't do it anymore. It wasn't possibly the best time to do it, considering considering the mission of the employer that I was working for. You know, by day swanning around in a cassock, and by night swanning around in far less. You know, that sort of thing. And there was a sense of immaturity in that, you know, this was my first proper job. The first time I was truly away from my family the other side of the country, rather than, you know, just a bus journey. I wasn't as knowledgeable as I am now. A little bit gullible, not very skeptical, not cynical, a bit too trusting perhaps, not very careful in what I said and who I said it to, what I wrote down, and who I sent that to as well. So, you know, there were. I won't say that it was a 100%, you know, unprovoked attack. There were things that I did that people could have taken the wrong way, might not have liked, and might have led to a sort of not sanctified, but a very low opinion, I suppose, of me, and a want maybe to get rid of me, you know, that sort of thing. So, and there's always been some question on my mind as to whether there were consequences, spiritual consequences to some of the stuff that I was involved with down there, and whether, you know, I won't say punishment, but that, you know, there were things that, you know, was this completely a case of, you know, fallen human beings, or was there sort of some level of divine punishment in that as well? I didn't have the level of revelation, I suppose, and the level of relationship that I have now with God at that point. It was still a very learning curve, a very, very quick learning curve. You know, the second questioning had only just finished before I went into my annus horribilis. So it was all very, very new, and there wasn't much of a depth in the relationship. And yes, it damaged things in terms of my faith in the church, I suppose. But ironically, it didn't damage my faith in terms of the Almighty, I suppose. It made me want to check it out for myself more, to make sure that what I was thinking was right and what everybody else was doing was wrong. And that's sort of where I'm going to leave it, I suppose. I'm sorry that this has gone on for hours and hours and hours, but, you know, it's hot, and, you know, occasionally it just all comes out, doesn't it? Quickly end with the birthdays. I want to wish a very happy birthday to all the following. Many happy returns, and I do hope they eat lots of cake. Although, if they're in this country, their cake will probably melt in the heat before they can eat it. We've got Laura Hill, Valerie Cisno. I struggle with the pronunciation of her name, I'm afraid. Gordon Ryan, Andrew Hardcastle, who did the double glazing, in fact, here at Markenfield last year. Adriano Curcio, who I went to school with, and Andrew Barrett. So, happy birthday to all of them. Sorry to have bored them with such a long blog, but occasionally these things happen.